The Journey of Square Peg, Chapter 17, Deer Hunter. In the early evening, I took up my bow and unholstered the pistol, passing it to Helen. She automatically pushed the magazine release, cocked the weapon to sight check that the chamber was empty, then pointing it away and decocking it, she cast an eye at the trigger to confirm it was drawn black. Satisfied it was made safe, she slipped the weapon into her belt, being careful not to snag the smooth slide on her belt. The pistol was our insurance policy. With 23 rounds left, our way to protect the children should stealth or our silent weapons fail us. It was clear she was comfortable with it now. I guessed she'd passed some time practicing. I remembered taking her to the range a few months after I bought the weapon. "I don't like you having a gun," she had said to me more than once before that. But when she had a chance to shoot with it, she discovered she was more accurate than me despite my greater practice. "KGB, I called her and grinned. She smiled the smile of a good KGB officer. She didn't complain about the weapon so much after her experience at the range and asked many questions about how to use it safely. Our finances, under the pressure of day-to-day life and my own expenditure on preparations, allowed for very little practice with the weapon, but we were competent and safe with it, and it had saved us more than once already. She was satisfied with that. I prepared to set off. Maybe after the last time I wanted more than fresh meat. Maybe I was hoping for a fix of adrenaline again. Who knows? I kissed my family one by one. The trails of my ghillie suit tickled their faces as I leaned towards them. My youngest baby chirped, "Bye, sweetie pie," as her wet lips brushed my painted cheek. "Daddy going," she informed everyone, pointing earnestly. We smiled as one. "Stay low," I warned them, and set off on what I hoped would be a less eventful hunt than the last one, skirting the clearing edge before heading towards the thicker forest below us on the hill. Helen's voice reached me in the undergrowth, telling me to be careful. My groin was still tight with dressings and newly growing muscle fibers, but it felt good to be on the move. The undergrowth in the forest was thick with bracken, interwoven with tripwires of soaring brambles. Nevertheless, I tuned into my surroundings with ease. This was my element. The evening passed in rare calm and quiet. It had been a long time since I was last alone. It felt strange to have only myself to watch out for, both liberating and lonely. I was no longer complete without them, yet unafraid to leave them. Determined to provide a meal, I passed many wet patches of mud on my trek, seeing very few tracks in them but those of birds. More than 60 million people had stripped the land of so much wildlife in their bid to survive the previous 3 years that it was now rare to see anything moving that wasn't winged. Such is the efficiency of man's self-destruction, foresight absent beyond the concern of satisfying immediate hunger. It had been the same before the end of oil, and we had stripped the seas of their great bounty by the same means. We had lived in the moment, lived for our immediate wants. We paid no more than lip service to the needs of future generations, and now, without the means to rectify our errors, our dreams of a future were dashed. It seemed all my instincts would be needed to provide for my family now. There was no safety net, only a reliance on what comes naturally to predators like me. In my childhood, I had found that movement was the great spoiler of a hunt. Armed with an air rifle, I had spent many hours motionless in camouflage, waiting for local wildlife to venture from hiding on essential errands, only to be plucked from life by me. It was the cause of much regret and soul-searching for many years that followed. I too had been caught in the moment, satisfying my greed for the excitement of the kill, the challenge, the need to outwit and prevail. but I have the excuse of being a foolish child rather than a globe full of selfish nations being driven over a precipice by the very economic machines they had themselves created. And when I understood the folly and cruelty of my actions, I changed my ways, trying to repent them through good deeds for the harm I had bestowed. The creatures, after all, were sentient beings just trying to get by, like me. The nations did no such reflection, simply continued on their drive into self-destruction. I was still occupied with such thoughts when the sun began to cast long shadows. I was in the scrubby woods, waiting in ambush as it warmed the painted skin on my face. As the leaves rustled and a bumblebee hummed close by, I let my mind go, surrendering to the caress. My concentration having drifted, I was caught unawares by a deer walking out right in front of me from the cover of a clump of bracken. I froze, hardly able to believe it. The creature was looking downhill and away from me, not seeing me at all. My heart beating faster, my every motion and thought focused on this hapless soul as I adjusted my notched arrow and drew the cord back as slowly as I could under the strain. Its flanks tensed at the faint sound of the arrow sliding on the bow, but it stayed rooted to the spot. Weapon primed, I stared down the deadly shaft of the arrow, crouching hidden behind a thicket of browning, quivering ferns, and waited for the creature to turn side on so that I could get a clear shot to its chest. Its muscles coiled, the black orbs of its eyes visible momentarily as it tilted its head. It stopped chewing for a moment and listened hard, then resumed, impossibly still and exposed. I took aim and was just about to loose the arrow when a mechanical crack from behind the ferns beat me to it, followed by a lightning-fast, short bolt which struck the deer cleanly in the back of the skull. The beast slumped instantly, kicking its legs. I remained stock still, frozen to the spot by the unexpected presence. Was I compromised again? Muntjac seemed to be unlucky for me. If you'd asked me what I hated most about modern life before the collapse, I'd have said repetition. It seems fate taunts me always. I had not moved, simply frozen, unaware of my presence. A hooded figure in loose blue robes veiling them from head to toe pounced forward, knelt on the dying beast, and cupped its snout in one hand, turned its head before preparing to cut its throat. In the name of God, came a soft female voice. Still poised to shoot, my mind was racing. What should I do? This was the first stranger I'd seen up close since the assailants. The pain in my thigh ghosted back momentarily. We'd spent so much effort keeping away from people, and now here I was, not nearly covert enough, on one knee and silhouetted against the darkened ferns, barely recovered in strength, and trying not to move as the bow strained every sinew. With the sun on my face, I had a poor view of the crouched woman. Neither did I know who was with her. Still undetected, I listened hard to pick up any unnatural sounds in the forest from the direction she had appeared. A crunching leaf, a snapping twig. Not daring to turn my head, for stillness was the only advantage I had now, I scanned for the telltale clues as far as my peripheral vision would allow, but there was nothing. Could she really be alone? Still, she knelt upon the beast, holding it and murmuring as it kicked its last few moments upon the earth, hooves cutting furrows in the soft mud. It felt like the earth was losing yet another innocent soul that it could not afford to. A shot would be easy for me. Feeling stayed my hand. Her appearance presented a stark dilemma. I knew that if I were compromised by her on her own terms, I risked being killed. It was unlikely that the now spent crossbow was her only weapon. What is more, I was not well enough hidden to let her go without conflict, and even if she left, She would leave with the only red meat we might see for weeks. My children were fading without the diet of fish we'd enjoyed previously. The solution to that was right in front of my eyes, a great prize indeed. But what world would I be contributing to if I shot this woman in the back just for meat and safety? In the moment, it may be the safest thing to do, but was it right? It didn't take long to decide. I raised myself silently to stand. She did not react as I took my first step, the glistening razor-edged arrow trained directly on her ribcage below the scapula, which presented an easy target for me at this range. I approached cautiously from her right rear flank, covering the ground with utter concentration, checking as far as I could that she was unaccompanied. I approached unnoticed until a soft twig buried in the mud gave a muffled snap as it bore my weight. I halted, but got no reaction. Resuming to close the distance to some 5 yards, I spoke firmly to her in a hushed voice. "Don't turn around." She froze. Tension rippled through her as fear took instant hold. She was compromised, and the reaction confirmed to me that she was not with anyone else. At the end of the breath she had held, her shoulders dropped, and she sighed in resignation, bowing her head. Acting purely on instinct again, I spoke. "Listen to me. I won't hurt you if I don't have to, but if you threaten me with any movement or sound, I will kill you without hesitation." I could not see her face. She made no sound, daring not to move. "Throw the knife off to your right without turning and put your hands behind your back. Do it." She complied slowly. The knife landed some 6 feet away in a deep pile of leaves. "Now roll backwards onto your back and keep your hands behind you." Stifling a gasp, she rolled, trapping her hands beneath her buttocks. Keeping her head facing forward, she allowed herself now to turn her eyes to see me, fully camouflaged as I was, the bow ready, the arrow tip pointed at her torso. She dared not speak. Instead, she lay as motionless as the deer at her feet. Something about her shone, radiating warmth and serenity to rival the setting sun. There was pride in her, lying there in the mud, quiet defiance under threat from a man. I stared hard at her as she sprawled supine in the mud. Her hair was jet black, her eyes sunken and dark, but her features beautiful. I scanned her contours for weapons, and then took a risk I'd never believed myself capable of. I lowered my bow, enough that should the arrow loose, it would not find her. "If you do not threaten me, you have nothing to fear," I repeated. "I want the deer, and I want to go." My own fear must have been clear in my breaking voice. My daughter's goodbye smile earlier this evening bolted across my mind's eye. What was I doing? How could I take such a risk? The stranger swallowed a couple of times, struggling to clear her throat too. "May I speak?" she finally asked. Her accent was a soft interplay between the West Midlands and the Far East. It was somehow familiar to me. "You may if you do not raise your voice." "Then I wish to thank you for not shooting me already." I did not answer. "I didn't realize the deer was yours. I apologize for killing it. I didn't know you were there." She said the words almost like a prayer, as if she were making peace with her God before the inevitable. "Where are the others?" I asked her, my tone short to discourage a lie. She replied, "There are others, but they aren't here. You understand I cannot tell you where they are, but they are a little way away." It was an intelligent answer. Had she followed a temptation to exaggerate their proximity, she risked being killed to allow me time to escape. Her tone, her face, nothing gave a hint of a lie. I nodded towards the deer. "Do you know how to dress it?" "I do." "Then I will watch you. Do not turn towards me with the knife." May I get it? She asked. I couldn't answer with words, as they became trapped by rising mortal fear in my throat. I nodded as I might to my own executioner. My mouth was dry. Before long, the beast lay expertly disemboweled. I threw the stranger a short length of paracord to tie the legs, forming the limp carcass into a sling. Small as it was heavy enough to slow down the bearer's movements, so that flight from the scene with the prize on her back would be rendered less fleet of foot. Leave the knife and the bolts on the ground, then stand by that tree, I ordered her, nodding to the side. Once she was well back, I stooped to pick up the unfamiliar weapons, tossed them amongst the leaves, and kicked more cover over them. I broke a branch of a small tree, leaving it hanging down with a long, fresh green splinter clearly visible. Get your bearings, I told her. You could return for them in the morning. She nodded, relief breaking across her features. The sun was now dipping into the distant horizon, shimmering at the vanishing point like red-hot metal as it enters the smith's water pail. Lie down again with your hands behind you, I told her. Her face tensed up once more, her breathing sped up. She dropped very slowly, uncertain now. As she lay in the muddy, blood-soaked leaves, I do not doubt that she believed it could be the end for her after all, a cruel twist. She stared to the southeast as tears welled in her eyes. What's there? I asked her. Mecca, she replied. Less of a threat as she was, I was able to rest my bow on my knee and hold the arrows still notched but no longer drawn. Watching her intently, I reached for my radio. I knew that all the time I had been gone, my wife and son would have been running the scanner to pick up any communications that might indicate enemies nearby. I gave the code, using my voice to give an approximation of radio static with a very specific rising and falling tone that sounded much like any long-wave radio being tuned, but in fact told my audience that I was speaking without duress. I repeated it 3 times before a double click, some seconds after my broadcast, told me they were listening. I used the speak button to Morse code a simple message. Guest, boy meet at road. The double click came again. It's getting late. You'll come with me until it is dusk. Then I'll give you time to take a cut of the meat and you'll be free to go tonight. She nodded, clearly relieved that her life was not to end there in the mud. At my instruction, she stood up slowly. I scanned the ground for my possessions. Head west, I said. With that, we set off on the long trek back to my camp. As she walked, the woman was silent, concentrating on placing every step cautiously. I guess she didn't want to risk inciting an attack from me should a stumble be mistaken for foul play. The further we walked, the less I held the string of my bow, until eventually I held only the bow shaft at waist height, the arrow gripped to it by my fore and middle fingers. No words were spoken as I scanned the ground around us and observed the gliding lope of my captive. Eventually, we reached the old asphalt strip that had been the main road linking 2 upmarket towns. It was an inch deep in leaf mould by now and littered with the gravel released from the surface by the weathering of the freezing winters. Nature was reclaiming even this most solid and unnatural of constructions, slowly erasing the endeavours of mankind. Our legacy looked set to be our own self-destruction, nothing more. In my heart, in the golden glory of the autumn, I could not feel sad for mankind, only for my children. Thus engaged in thought, I instructed my captive to stick within the bounds of the forest and skirt down the cutting to the crossing I had used earlier, where the trees on both sides closed in as near as possible to the edge of the road. This narrowed the open crossing point to some 30 feet, with a mile-long sight line in either direction that would expose us dangerously as we crossed despite a smattering of abandoned cars that littered it. And there in the dense thicket of saplings, all fighting for precious resources at the cost of each other, I told her to wait, facing back into the forest along the route we had come. Thus, she did not see the direction from which my wife, who had chosen to come in Michael's place for fear that I might need the firearm, accessed our position. The pistol was drawn and cocked. Helen was fearful and staring with questioning eyes, all intrigue and wonder at what I had done. I had no choice, I told her. I was compromised and didn't see how it would be right to kill her in cold blood. She's followed my instructions and not attempted to give us away. Lower the gun. Reluctantly, Helen agreed and passed me the weapon, perhaps unable to trust herself with performing the act again should it be necessary, but knowing that I could. What will you do with her? She asked. She can't come with us, it's too risky. Her eyes drilled into me, hunting for answers. We can't eat all the deer before it spoils. We don't have enough salt left to preserve it. We can't risk smoking it knowing that there are people nearby. We will give her a share and send her away when it's dark. My wife listened, and now she trusted me, seeming to draw relief from knowing that this was a temporary situation. She knew we would have to set out from our current base as soon as possible now, too. It was inconvenient to run, and travelling at night was dangerous, but it was the price to be paid for my decision. What's your name? She addressed our captive. I am Maya, the woman replied, not looking back, daring not to turn to face Helen. Then, Maya, you must understand that I am a mother. You must know that I will not hesitate to protect my family. Do not give me a reason to kill you. I will not. Turn then. Helen kept her distance, but drew breath almost imperceptibly as Maya was revealed. I recognize your accent, she continued as the woman faced her. A look of relief flashed over the stranger's face. Where are you from? Asked Helen, recovering. Birmingham, she replied, but my grandparents came from Azerbaijan. Interesna, replied my wife in Russian, and seeing that Maya understood, they exchanged a few more words. Check her for weapons, I said, trying to change the course of this stream. You haven't already? Asked my wife, surprised. I shook my head. Helen moved forward, imitating the military frisks and searches that she had seen covered by war correspondents so many years ago. She found only a small knife tucked in the woman's boot and a torch. You may take the hind legs, she said, satisfied. We need the pelt and brain. The children need the liver. Where is it? I left the heart, kidney and liver inside, replied the girl, to keep them clean. You have how many children? My wife was silent and began to peer closely at the woman. Close up, she inspected the woman's left ear, drawing my attention too. The tragus was clearly pushing out by swelling around it. Did you hit her? She asked me, and then asked her, Are you hurt? No, I replied, speaking before my captive. Maya added softly, My ear is infected. It throbs terribly and I can't hear so well on that side. Your husband, he is your husband. Your husband did not touch me at all. He chose not to kill me. She looked at me as she continued. He took a great risk. I am grateful to you for sparing me. I did not hear you in the forest. I didn't mean to kill your deer. I would gladly give you all of it. I will take none. I wish only to live a little longer, for I am a mother too. Her words were spoken with a curious mix of imploring and joy, as if this event had deeper meaning for her. She understood, it seemed, that our lives were returning to the nasty and short existence we once evolved from, that decisions were based on survival instincts. Perhaps she was in shock at still being alive. A further shock was to follow. We have antibiotics. My wife's face set with determination as I shot her a look. They are almost expired. They don't work well on us anymore. Perhaps they will help you. No, I snapped. We may need them ourselves. She can take some meat and go. Helen was calm, almost serene. My husband, what was the point of sparing her if we are not to help her? I believe that if we show some kindness, Maya will return it by not hunting us down once we set her free and she returns to her people. We will trade free passage from here with what we have to trade. Since you decided to put us in this situation, we must pay the price. Besides, we can spare enough for one short course and still have some left for ourselves up until they expire. What else would you do? Send her to walk into an ambush with her senses malfunctioning? We must help her, as she might help us in the same situation. I thought for a moment. She had a point. Prepare the meat, I replied quietly. I did not answer on the antibiotics. They were the post-collapse equivalent of the family silver. My wife tossed Maya the knife and I took up a position to shoot her, should I need to. The woman stared at Helen, eyeing her up and down, appraising her, then almost reluctantly turned to the task. Before long she had the thin red meat of the hindquarters trussed and slung on her belt. Above us, the first stars began to glimmer in the clear sky. A chill wind wound its way around my neck. Wait here for me? My wife asked me as the last light faded. She did not go far before her camouflaged form blended completely into the thicket. We sat in silence and waited. When she returned 20 minutes later, she handed Maya two things, a thin silver foil wrap of round pills and a handful of wild garlic leaves. Make a pine needle tea to take with the pills, she told her, and rub the meat with these. As she transferred the leaves, Maya cupped her hand with both of hers. She held them for a moment, bowing her head slightly, then holding her gaze. The kindness was accepted as a sign that she was home and free, less her weapons maybe, but with the addition of these vital prizes, the drugs and the kindness of a stranger. I will not forget how you treated me, she intoned. The Most Holy, peace be upon him, watch over you and keep you until I can return this kindness. Anxious to see my children, I signalled the direction she should take and handed her the small knife and torch. Don't use the torch, I told her, fearful it would draw any searchers towards our position. Spasiba, she replied tentatively, then nodded, turned, and was soon gone amongst the trees, a ghost in flowing robes. I am sorry. Don't be. You did the right thing. It makes a nice change to help someone. It makes me feel human again.